about to puke on these pages. He's channeling his dead brother's spirit. Well, shit. Hi guys, it's Teresa. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm gonna be having the dubious honor of talking to you about my most hated book in recent history, I guess. Wow. And that is Well Met by Jen DeLuca. I asked you guys on Instagram what you wanted me to title this video, if it should be Well Shit or Shit Met. Those were my two very clever, witty options. Almost all of you voted for Well Shit, and I love that on so many levels because one, you can imagine a comma in between and it's just like, well, shit. Or you can take the like British sort of slang expression of like, that's well good, and say, oh, that's well shit. I don't know if that's ever used in that way, but we're gonna make it happen today, right here. You're welcome. I've written about 3 pages on everything that I want to say in this video, so I have at least some semblance of a structured thought today, which should be good. Let's get into it. If you didn't know, and you're living under a rock, Well Met is a recently released adult romance that is set at a Renaissance fair. And that already had me like all excited for this book because honestly, that sounds really cool. Unfortunately, it isn't, but we'll get to that later. In this book, we follow a 24-year-old woman called Emily who has just recently broken up with her boyfriend, who's basically used her and then dumped her when he didn't need her anymore. And her sister, her older sister April, had an accident where she broke her leg, so Emily decides to move in with April to take care of her and her daughter Caitlin. And Caitlin over the summer really wants to participate in a Renaissance fair that is put on by their small town every single year, and in order to participate she needs an adult volunteer to sort of participate with her. And Emily reluctantly agrees, and so she ends up getting a role as a tavern wench, basically a barmaid at the fair. The guy who puts on the fair is 27-year-old Simon, who has been doing this for a very long time. His brother Sean was the one who initiated the fair, but unfortunately Sean has passed away a few years ago, and so they're still trying to put on the fair in his honor, in his memory, kind of keeping on the tradition that way. So Simon takes the Renaissance Fair very seriously, and he's very strict and doesn't take kindly to Emily's kind of easygoing attitude, and she also wants to implement some changes that she thinks would be better for the fair, which he doesn't approve of. So the two of them start off with a bit of a rocky relationship, but when the fair actually takes off, they're both in character, and she's playing a tavern wench and he's playing a pirate, and their characters basically start a relationship, which then leads to them also being in a relationship. I mean, that's not a spoiler. It's a romance novel. By the way, in general, I don't really think that there's such a thing as a spoiler in a romance novel unless there's like some big reveal, which there really isn't here. So I'm gonna talk about everything in this video. If you're not prepared to hear all of that, yeah, you're really not missing out by not reading this book, so I recommend still watching, honestly. It will be better for your wallet as well as for your psyche not to buy and read this book. Let's get into my very first point of critique, which is my biggest, and that is Emily as a person, Emily as a character, Emily as a main character specifically in a romance, because holy fuck, I hate that girl so much. The reason she and Simon don't really get along from the get-go is because when she signs up, like the form that she hands to him, he finds like a small thing that she forgot to put, like she forgot to choose a role to play at the fair, and he points this out to her, and she is unreasonably offended and calls this like a point of criticism apparently against her. And from that moment forward, anytime she sees Simon, she has like a visceral negative reaction towards him because, God forbid, he pointed out to her that she filled the file out wrong. But this is really the basis for their mutual dislike. Actually, we don't really know why Simon doesn't like her. It's explained throughout the book that he's just going through a really tough time every summer surrounding the fair since his brother died because of that. And then Emily walks in and she has like, you know, a lot more laissez-faire attitude towards the fair. She doesn't really care about it that much. Laissez-faire. Get it? Oh, I'm so unintentionally witty today. It's great. So basically, the two of them start off in a mutual dislike. As I said, it's not really well-founded, but nothing in this novel is, so there you go. Then they also have this really weird moment where she mentions that she's a college dropout, and he looks at her like in a disapproving way or something. And she gets really upset by that because she thinks that he's basically looking down on her for not having finished college. And this is also like leaves a bad taste in her mouth. And then later when they're together, they talk about this, and he literally says that he was disappointed for her and not in her. Let me read this to you. It's on page 207. Let me just pull that up on my little handy, annotated thing. I saw your face when you said you hadn't finished school. You looked disappointed in yourself. I hated that for you. That's his explanation of why I looked at her in a disapproving way. That's great. That's just great. By the way, this is about like the second or third time that they're meeting, so they really don't have much rapport before this, and there's absolutely no reason why he would feel any kind of way about her, but whatever. Reasons aren't really a thing in this book either. So Emily is basically extremely easily offended by like any and all sorts of criticism or like telling her anything that she has to do when she's there for the first time and doesn't have a clue, but okay, sure, super offensive. But literally at the same time, she's the most judgmental person in the world. For example, there's a scene where she literally scoffs at an older woman who's running a bookstore and says she doesn't have social media. And she more or less like rolls her eyes and is like, oh my God, you don't have social media? Like what? That's like the first thing you do. Like this bookstore is in a shitty small town that has maybe like 300 people living there. Everybody who would shop at that bookstore is already shopping there. There's also another guy who works at the fair. He's called Mitch, and he's kind of the main reason that Emily even signed up in the first place, because she saw him and he's like really hunky and attractive and has all these muscles and he's really sexy, and she's just like, oh my God, literally salivating over him throughout the book, throughout most of the book, before she falls in love with Simon or whatever. So from the first moment she meets him, almost all the way throughout the whole book, she's constantly talking about how attractive and sexy and like his nice calves and all that stuff. Basically leering at him anytime he turns his back on her and like exposes his butt, and like he's supposed to wear a kilt at the fair and she like fetishizes this as well. And he's like, oh my God, what might he have under the kilt? Oh my God, like she's literally a creep about it, honestly. And then he has the audacity to reciprocate this lewd behavior by looking at her boobs, and she's instantly annoyed and like puts him in a category of, okay, he's a hunk, but he's an idiot, basically. Like this is like a split-second decision she makes, and I'm like, if that's the rule on how that works, then you're in this very same category, my friend, because this is the epitome of a double standard, and it persists throughout the book. First of all, she makes all her decisions like this about people, and then puts them in these arbitrary categories, judging them for things that she's doing herself. Don't ask me what calendar tartan was. I didn't care. That wasn't important. What was important? Those legs. In a kilt, Mitch transformed from goofy jock douche to a man who didn't skip a leg day, a man with calves that could have been cut. Like I was just checking out my own legs. I was just checking the microphone, I'm sorry. A man with calves that could have been carved from marble. There were muscle and power in those legs, and I'd never wanted to touch a guy's legs the way I wanted to put my hands on Mitch's. Okay, that's just really creepy, okay? And then it continues, like seamlessly. But then he strutted over in our direction, his eyes focused about 6 inches south of my chin, and I bit back a sigh. Yes, the boy was hot, but much to my libido's chagrin, looks weren't everything. Okay, she's also, from the moment she meets him, referring to him as like a meathead, a douchebag, stupid, that sort of thing. Like really derogatory terms. He's really nice to her throughout the book. Like there's absolutely nothing wrong with his behavior ever. But she immediately puts him in this category, and later they do become friends, and she sort of has a moment of like, oh, maybe I judged him too quickly. But then there's other moments where she's just flat out like impressed at him having any sort of intelligence. There's a moment where he explains to her why it's normal for the people working at the fair, which takes place on Saturday and Sunday on the weekends, why it's normal for them to go out on Sunday night instead of Saturday night, which is very logical because obviously they're still working on Sunday and probably not working on Monday. So he explains this to her and she's flabbergasted that he is able to string together any sort of like coherent argument. What? I have never read anything more condescending in my life, I swear. Wow. When I first met Mitch, I wouldn't have thought he was capable of putting together a cohesive argument, but here we were. Sure, said argument was about drinking, but still, I was impressed. Well, I'm not at your personality, because it's utter garbage. Emily is also very self-involved and arrogant. Her catchphrase throughout the book is basically, fixing things is what I do, but this isn't something that we're ever fully shown. She just keeps like referring to it weirdly. The only real information backing up the fact is her dubious previous relationship to her ex-boyfriend, which is actually a whole other story because it's such a shit show. Basically, she hooked up with this guy in college and then, as she puts it, they like never officially started dating because it just sort of eased into a relationship, which they were in for 5 years without ever talking about it apparently. And then she quit university to take on a second job because he was in law school and needed to study a lot. So basically their deal was she would work now and support the both of them. And then when he was finished with law school and had taken the bar and stuff, he would support her. Does this not sound like the worst setup in the history of everything? First of all, why would you do something like this for a guy that you're not even officially dating? For 5 years! Oh my god! She kept giving and giving and giving, and basically her boyfriend used her, and then when he actually got out of law school and took the bar and passed and stuff like that, he dumped her ass. It's a shitty situation. I probably would feel sympathy for her if she weren't such an asshole. Like, it's really hard to care about bad things happening to her when you're that shit of a person. So since then, she basically has gotten it into her head that people only like her to use her basically, and they never like her for her, but for what she can do for them. This is also something she repeats a lot. This is a really weird tidbit that doesn't add much to the story or Emily's character and just kind of forces a depth to her that just isn't there and isn't constructed well or used well or makes much sense in the, collection of other nonsense that is this book. So it's just really annoying that this is constantly brought up and like you're supposed to feel so bad for her, but it's just impossible to do basically. Emily is also supposed to be this organizational talent, which she also keeps talking about constantly, nonstop. She never shuts up about how good she's at organizing. We never really see this. There's like one scene where she tries to help this older woman that she scoffed at for not having social media for a bookstore. She helps her take her bookstore up a notch, but it's literally, the moment is made out to be like she's literally giving her all these wonderful ideas of what to do with the bookstore when it's just the most basic stuff. The other woman, Chris, already has like a coffee machine in there that she sometimes serves coffee from to customers. And she already said, oh, I have this idea of like making it a little bit into a coffee shop as well as a bookstore. And then Emily comes in and she's like, okay, I know exactly what to do. We get some, wait for it, tables, comfy chairs, you serve coffee, you make pastries, and then Chris is like, oh my god, yes, that's it. That's what I've been waiting for. Emily, revolutionizing coffee shops since 2019. And again, this is another presumably positive trait about Emily that can't be shown by itself as a positive trait without simultaneously putting other people down in the same breath. Basically, she's doing what like everybody tells you not to do. Don't put others down to make yourself look better. And that's all she does. Basically, she's like, oh, Stacy, for example, the other tavern wench working with her, isn't so good at organizing, but I am. There's this ridiculous moment where they spend 3 pages thinking about why this year is so much busier than last year, and then they come to the very far-fetched conclusion that it might be because they have 2 tavern wenches this year instead of 4 like last year. Takes them 3 pages, I know. Pretty fast if you ask me. But basically she also puts this on Stacy and uses this moment to point out that she's so unorganized, like she didn't think of this or something. Like it's so odd and it's so misplaced in that moment specifically, and just in general, like just leave it out. There's absolutely no need. How about you actually show the main character organizing things well and having a handle on it instead of just pushing it down our throats. And the only way to make it stick is basically to remind the reader that other people are worse at it than Emily is. Like, isn't that just really shitty? The story itself also tries really hard to push this narrative that she's so responsible and so well organized and always takes on stuff for other people, and she's like putting herself out for other people all the time. She's so selfless, and it's truly obnoxious. Like, can you stop with the, what's the opposite of self-flagellation? I think it's a word I would get demonetized for, but you can think of it yourself. There's this moment where Mitch, for example, is saying, Simon is so busy paying attention to other people and what they need from him that he doesn't go after what he wants for himself. He sent me a pointed look. I don't know. Maybe you know what that's like. I cleared my throat. Maybe a little. Right! You've been non-stop talking about this. We get it. We get it. Okay. And there's moments of such arrogance everywhere, like this one. In fact, Stacy looked relieved that I'd put a plan into place. After what Chris had said about Stacy not being too organized, I felt bad for her. Since she'd been guiding me all this time, choosing my outfit and educating me in all things fair, I'd assumed she was in charge. But that wasn't her personality. That wasn't the kind of person she was. But it was the kind of person I was. I could organize. Putting the volunteers where they needed to be was easy. In my bar days, I'd managed employees all the time. If this were a real person, wouldn't you want to constantly punch her in the face? And then on top of that level of arrogance, she also has this fake humility going on, which is so much worse. It's when Chris talks to Emily about the bookstore and the coffee shop and stuff, and she says, I know it doesn't seem like much, but I couldn't have done it on my own, organizing it all. She tipped her cup at me in acknowledgement. That's something you're very good at. See what I mean? And then she says, oh, the compliment flustered me, and I busied myself by wiping down the counter. I don't know about that. I get an idea in my head on how things could be, and if I can make them happen, I do it. Doesn't seem like much. Like, I'm about to puke on these pages, and that's a bad thing because I want to return this book. I don't think anybody would buy it then. So this part of Emily's personality is the worst, and it also ties in with her martyr complex, which I touched on a little bit earlier, which is that she has this idea in her head that like she is always the one who needs to be responsible for everything, and it's something that she doesn't choose, but people put on her, basically. And it's ridiculous because, in fact, she does choose it. She does put herself in these situations all the time. In fact, she takes responsibility for things that aren't her responsibility and that are other people's responsibility, but she doesn't give them even a chance to step up to the plate. What? Is that a phrase? I don't know. She doesn't give them a chance to actually fulfill their responsibilities because she presumptively assumes that they won't, and that they're not capable of it, and then she has to do it. For example, she has this idea in her head that Simon is overwhelmed with the fair and that he's only doing it because his brother wanted him to, sort of thing, or he's doing it in his brother's honor and not because he wants to, so he's not letting other people help, which is true. But then again, she's only known him for a very short amount of time, and she immediately assumes that she's the only person in the entire town who's had that stroke of genius, realizing that Simon might be in over his head, that he might need help and stuff like that. And this is also brought up constantly where other people that are his friends since he was a child, like they are supposed to know him well and know a lot about him, and they're like, what? No, he loves it. And then she comes along and she's like, no, I see the truth. That's what he's saying. But what he means is he doesn't want to do it anymore. Like, oh. And then she kind of puts it on herself basically to remedy the situation, inserting herself in something that she has no part in being in. And it just serves again to make her look better by, again, putting other people down. This is a theme throughout the book. And this is one of these paragraphs where that really shows well. So in this clip, Simon and Emily are talking and he says, "I wasn't in a very good mood at the start of the summer, if you recall." And then she thinks to herself, "I did recall. He'd been in a pretty bad place. Lots of people had commented on it to me, but had I been the only one who'd actually talked to him about it? Did the rest of this town take him for granted?" They probably wouldn't if this were a real story, but because this author is desperately trying to make Emily look good, unfortunately still failing at it. But enough of Emily. Let's talk about Simon, whose character is confusing and also confused himself. Basically, the idea behind this book is that the main characters play these roles at the fair, and then they are themselves in real life, obviously, and these two represent like different sides of their personality, or almost basically different personalities, and there's like a disconnect sometimes between who you're actually talking to, or like who you're in a relationship with later on type of thing. I know it doesn't actually work that way, but whatever. For the sake of this book, it works that way. So Simon in the real world is basically a young man who has lived his life under his older brother's shadow, who was always very charming and outgoing and everybody loved him. So that had put a damper on his personality type of thing, and he became very subdued and introverted and kind of, you know, very much a stickler for rules and like trying to carve out his own small space in the world type of thing. And then the pirate character he plays at the fair is him, and I quote, channeling his brother, which sounds a little too much like a Ouija situation for my taste, but whatever. And apparently that makes him into this also charming, outgoing, like extroverted pirate character. Which in theory makes sense, but in reality, not exactly. Because sure, while you might take inspiration from a living person when you're playing, acting as a character, that doesn't mean that your actions that you yourself, by the way, without a script or anything, take as that character are completely disconnected from what you would do in real life. Because the biggest thing that the book tries to sell you somehow is that the pirate version of Simon likes Emily while the real version doesn't, or does later on, but at first not really. I don't understand. Don't ask me any questions about this because I cannot answer them. It is the most nonsensical thing I've read in a very long time, and I recently read The Last Time I Lied, so that's really saying something. Honestly, for a romance, it's quite tragic to say, but the biggest plot hole in this entire book is how these two people ever even came to like one another. And that is a very important question if you ask me, and it's never, ever, ever, ever answered. Let me give you a little overview of how their relationship develops. So at first, they meet and they have both a very like sort of negative first impression from one another. Simon finds her a little too easygoing and he doesn't like her new ideas, which is understandable. And Emma thinks he's too strict and basically has a stick up his ass. In this situation, her viewpoint is understandable, as is his, because we know because of his brother's death at this time of year and his brother's connection to the fair, he's in a very weak mental state and like very vulnerable and probably irritable and all that stuff. So that's definitely understandable, as is Emma's situation at this point, because she doesn't know him. They then meet a couple of times before the fair starts in real life, and they have like a few meaningful conversations, mainly about Shakespeare, which is like the only thing I can tell that they have in common, because she was an English major before she dropped out. He's an English teacher. They like Shakespeare. Great. Wow. So original. But even through these conversations, Emily's feelings towards him don't change, and he seems to also not really change his demeanor towards her. They do, both of them warm up a little over talking over Shakespeare, but then a thing happens where he like looks down on her for like being a college dropout, and it kind of severs any and all possibility of them ever like getting along, basically. The most important thing to remember here is that Simon at this point doesn't seem remotely interested in Emily or her ideas for the fair. He seems pretty much like, nope, I don't want to get into this, not interested in you as a person. That's okay. No one else is either, I promise you. However, then they meet in character for the first time at the fair. And literally the first thing Simon does is give her this huge smile. He smiles at her across the fair and she's like completely taken aback. He seems like a completely different person. She also finds him extremely attractive as a pirate. Just based on their previous interactions, this makes absolutely no sense. Why would Simon, if he was at all interested in Emily before that point, not be a little nicer to her? There was nothing stopping him from smiling at her, being friendly with her as a normal human being. But no, apparently he had to save that until he was in character as a pirate. And then all of a sudden he's like super interested in her, smiles at her, beams at her. They have this connection and she's taken aback, rightly so, by this reaction to her. And then from that on that basis, kind of her feelings for him start to change as well. But we never ever find out why now he apparently likes her. This is just never explained. There's no reason for him to like her. Then they start a full-on relationship in character based on a fake bonding ceremony that Simon, as the pirate, initiates. So this isn't even something that was planned all along and they were forced into it. No, this is something, a decision that Simon makes. So again, they didn't fall in love because they were forced to pretend to be in a relationship, because Simon initiated the fake relationship for no reason. So this is kind of the circulatory logic of this book, is that it's trying to say basically they fell in love because they had to be in a fake relationship in character. But the reason they were in a fake relationship is because Simon already liked her. So which is it? So they start flirting in character and making out, and then things move into the real world as well. And then they have some issues in the real world. I call it that now, I don't know why. And then they have a lot of contrived drama that I'll also get into later, but basically a lot of it is based on the fact that Simon thinks she didn't like the real him at the beginning. But I'm like, yeah, because you were mean to her. So why would she? Why wouldn't you be nice to her if you wanted to be liked? But he thinks that she's only with him because she likes the pirate, basically, and that's a whole issue. They also have this little problem moment where Simon thinks that she and Mitch are together in real life, but he keeps flirting and making out with her in character because that's somehow okay. Like, it's totally fine to make out with the presumed girlfriend of one of your best friends if you're playing characters. Definitely. But in real life, stays kind of cold towards her, and then eventually she goes to him and they meet their feelings for each other. And this is basically the point where I feel like the book should have ended. Because after that, it's just so much contrived drama and problems and conflict that isn't really conflict, that's only based on miscommunication and actively misunderstanding what the other person is saying and thinking. So one moment, Emily and Simon understand each other so well, and she can tell, even without him explicitly telling her, that he wants to relinquish some responsibility of the fair and like he needs help and stuff like that. The next moment, he tells her while they're having sex, unprompted, completely sincerely, and without any ambiguity, that he's not a one-night stand kind of guy, that this means something to him, that he wants more from her. And she is confused by that. She spends like the next few days like thinking, oh my god, what if it didn't mean anything to him and he doesn't want me, and like what if I shouldn't stay in town after the summer is over, and like that's the whole last 100 pages or so, and I was ready to die. So overall, the best way I can put it is this book doesn't know what it wants to be, or what its character should be, what its story should be, because it just constantly changes based on nothing. The book tries to be a hate to love romance, but there's neither enough reasons for them to hate each other nor for them to love each other. The book wants Simon to be this like soft boy, vulnerable type of character that is like traumatized by the loss of his brother and still grieving and like taking on too much than he can bear. But then as soon as he like gets the girl, he becomes this like flirtatious rake almost, and while they're having sex is like making innuendos and like, oh look what I can do with my tongue type thing, and being way too like outgoing to match with this first personality. And then it's also constantly said like, oh, the reason he's always jealous of Mitch is because Mitch always got all the girls and he didn't have much game or much chance with them. But then again, that really doesn't fit with this whole rake persona that is conjured up all of a sudden. And again, this is the problem. They try to justify all of this by just saying, oh, but he's playing the pirate. He's channeling his dead brother's spirit or whatever. Like, that's not a reason. If you're very insecure, if you have issues with intimacy or with being honest about your feelings or genuinely with, you know, being vulnerable, that doesn't change just because you're pretending to be a pirate at a Renaissance fair, okay? None of that changes at the drop of a hat, and definitely not while you're in the moment of having sex with someone you really like. Like, I feel like the first time you have sex as that character, that first character, you would be a little bit more self-conscious and like unsure, but no, because this book needs to be sexy and like still be erotic kind of sense. We need the rake persona, but only for the sex scenes. And outside of that, he's just like, oh, like that doesn't work. That's not how personalities work. They don't change that quickly, and certainly they don't change because you put a pirate's hat on them. Finally, and this is the last thing I'll say, this book has 0 plot. And I understand romances don't need to have a lot of plot, but they need to have some plot as like a scaffolding, if that's the right word, to build the romance around. You can't just like tell a romance that is boring as shit. This book is that. It's just the romance. That's why there's so much contrived nonsense in there, because there's no meat to the story. They go to the Renaissance fair every weekend. That is literally the story. I was hoping at least for the very cliche, like, oh, the fair is dying because of reasons, we need help to save it. Like, not even that minimum of effort. Not even that. Nope, there's just no story. They're just there. That's it. They're just there. Honestly, I just skimmed the last 50 pages or so because I was bored out of my mind. After they got together that first time, as I said, the book devolves into just utter shit. I mean, it was shit before, but I couldn't even read. I couldn't care about any of it anymore. I was like, just end the book right here. This is where it should have ended. After that, it's just cheesy bullshit and contrived problems that aren't problems, and every conflict isn't really a conflict, but just, you know, plot convenience and whatnot, and it's truly very, very exhausting to read. In conclusion, I am genuinely flabbergasted that this book is getting such rave reviews everywhere, because I do not understand why. Like, genuinely, this book is objectively garbage, and I'm sorry if that offends you, but it is. Like, what part of this is a good romance? I hated the characters. I hated them so much. I hate Emily to the bottom of my heart. And that is not something you can pull off in a romance. A romance doesn't work with an unlikable main character or any unlikable characters in the relationship, because you want the readers to like vicariously experience this through the story. And you can't when you have a visceral hatred for them. Just don't read it. Like, genuinely, I'm returning this as soon as I put down this video. I don't want this in my life. I don't want this in my house. I just don't want it, okay? It's a garbage book. It has absolutely no redeeming qualities. Like, there's a few, I will say this, there's a few tiny, teensy tiny moments that weren't garbage. That was like, oh, that's kind of sweet. And then it went right back down. So that is my conclusion for the day. I'm very sorry if you had a different experience. Please let me know in the comments why, how, through what magic. I hated this. Have I said that before? I hated this. So don't read it if you can avoid it. And let me know your thoughts in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a like and subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to upload about every 5 days right now, which is working pretty well for me, and I hope for you as well. And yeah, hope to see you very soon with another video. Until then, have a lovely week and don't read this shit book. Okay, bye!